When I was a kid, I occasionally experienced something unsettling at night while lying in bed. It happened rarely, maybe a few times a year, but whenever it did, I felt a powerful, intense presence watching me. It would usually wake me up in the middle of the night, and I would instinctively keep my eyes closed, trying to ignore it until either the feeling passed or I drifted back to sleep. It never felt benevolent, more like something sinister lurking in the dark. As I grew older, I started to think my reaction was childish and irrational, so I decided to confront this strange fear. The next time I felt the presence, I mustered the courage to open my eyes and cheerfully say, "Hello." That was a huge mistake. Immediately, the presence became overwhelmingly intense, far more than I had ever felt before. My memories of what happened next are a blur, but I know for certain that at the beginning I was fully awake. I even performed a lucid dreaming check, looking at my alarm clock twice to see if the time stayed consistent. In dreams, written text and numbers often change when you look away and back again. The time remained steady, confirming I wasn't dreaming, at least at first. But at some point, I fell asleep, though I have no clear memory of when or how it happened. What I do remember is suddenly being in a bright room with my cousin sitting on the bed, scolding me not to ever do something so reckless as speaking to it again. I later messaged her on WhatsApp, curious to see if she had experienced something similar that night, but she hadn't. The transition between wakefulness and sleep is a complete gap in my memory. After the lucid dreaming check, I panicked and tried to leave my room. That's when things took a turn for the worse. Shadowy hands burst through the floor, reaching for me. I think they managed to grab me, but I can't recall the details clearly. What I do know is that I was awake when I checked the clock, and I ended up asleep. Yet I can't pinpoint when that shift occurred. I wrote down parts of the experience in a journal, but haven't looked at those notes in years. I doubt they contain much more detail than what I've shared here. Ever since that extreme encounter, I've never dared to acknowledge the presence again. Strangely, I haven't felt it in years, especially since moving out of my parents' house. It only ever happened in that old room of mine. I've lived in the same house my entire life. As a kid, my childhood was like anyone else's, pretty normal. On my 5th birthday, though, something strange happened. As my parents tucked me in that night, they told me very firmly, "Never leave your room after 3 a.m. I didn't think much of it at the time. I rarely woke up during the night, so it was easy to follow that rule. It just seemed like one of those odd things parents tell you, and I assumed it was normal. Years later, when I turned 13, I suddenly remembered that strange rule and decided to ask my parents about it. That day, they were in the kitchen laughing and having a good time while making lunch. Casually, I asked, "Why can't I leave my room after 3 a.m.? Their expressions changed instantly. The laughter stopped and their faces went pale. They exchanged nervous glances before my dad finally said, "Don't worry about it. You're too young." Sensing the tension, I didn't push further and went back to my room. But their reaction stuck with me. That night, my parents were staying at my grandparents' house, and I was home alone with my brother. Sometime after 3 a.m., I woke up with a dry throat, craving a glass of water. I remembered the strange rule, but figured they only didn't want me getting up because it was late, and they didn't want to be disturbed. Besides, I thought it was probably just the cat that made the noise I heard in the living room. I couldn't have been more wrong. As I crept out of my room and walked toward the kitchen, I froze. I heard heavy footsteps pacing in the living room. At first, I assumed it was my brother, but something felt off. My stomach tightened as I realized it was exactly 3:17 a.m., and I had broken the one rule my parents warned me about. After getting my water, I turned to head back to my room when I saw it. Standing in the kitchen, was a creature, unlike anything I'd ever seen. It was deformed, with blood dripping from its exposed bones. My breath caught in my throat. The thing tilted its head unnaturally and grinned, its mouth stretching impossibly wide, far beyond what any human could do. Before I could react, it dropped onto all fours and sprinted toward me, moving faster than I thought possible. I dropped the glass in sheer terror and bolted back to my room, slamming the door behind me. Shaking, I grabbed my cat and locked myself in the bathroom. I could hear it crashing through my bedroom door, its footsteps heavy and menacing. Then, it started pounding on the bathroom door, each hit shaking me to my core. I was sure it would break through. But then, just as suddenly as it started, the banging stopped. I heard a window shatter, followed by the front door creaking open and then slamming shut. It left. I don't know where it went, but I've heard of strange things happening in our neighborhood in Los Lunas, New Mexico. I haven't left my room after 3 a.m. since that night. Now, at 16, I've learned to trust my instincts and stay locked away until I see daylight. If you live in Los Lunas, take my advice. Never leave your room after 3 a.m. If you do, be prepared to run. My friend Jess once had a terrifying experience while driving home from her parents' house through a rural area in southern Germany. It was late at night, and the ride had been uneventful until she suddenly came across a large log blocking the road. Annoyed, since this was the only route she could take without adding another hour to her drive, she got out to inspect the obstruction. In rural Germany, encountering dangerous wildlife is rare, so she didn't suspect anything unusual as she began moving the log out of the way. It took her a while, and by the time she was done, another car had pulled up a short distance behind her. Assuming the driver was just waiting for her to move so they could continue their journey, Jess got back into her car and resumed driving. At first, she thought nothing of the other car following her down the same road. It was the only way through, after all. However, as she entered the next town and the car was still behind her, she started to feel uneasy. Her nerves escalated when the car continued following her through multiple turns, clearly not coincidental anymore. Panicking, Jess called the police, explained the situation, and told them she was heading home so they could intercept the suspicious vehicle when she arrived. Knowing the police might take a few more minutes to reach her, she decided to park a few houses away from her actual address to avoid leading the stranger to her doorstep. She sat in her car, doors locked, pepper spray in hand, and waited to see if the car would follow her. To her horror, the other car pulled up right behind her and parked. A man then stepped out and approached her vehicle, waving and gesturing toward the back of her car. Confused and anxious, Jess barely rolled down her window to ask what he wanted. The man told her he had been following her not to harm her, but to warn her. He explained that while she had been moving the log earlier, he saw someone sneak into her trunk. Jess was terrified and unsure whether to trust him, but the man showed her that he had already called the police. Realizing he might be telling the truth, she cautiously got out of the car. Just minutes later, the police arrived, opened her trunk, and found a man hiding inside. He was immediately arrested. The stranger had been trying to help Jess all along. The man hiding in her trunk, however, had clearly intended something malicious, though Jess never learned the exact details. Since that night, she has always made sure her car is locked and checks her trunk and windows before getting in. The experience left her shaken, but grateful that the stranger had been there to warn her. It serves as a chilling reminder of how quickly things can take a dangerous turn when we least expect it.